Welcome to the Practice You podcast. My name is Elena Brower. Together, we'll explore and enjoy content and conversations around mastering transitions in our relations, our wellness, our careers, our families, and especially in our missions and visions. You are invited to learn and love and listen with me. Welcome to Practice You. Welcome back to the podcast. I have with me today a longtime student, a true intuitive. So if you're interested in honing your intuition, stay with me. Her name is Amisha Ghadiali, and she is an intuitive therapist, yoga meditation teacher. She's the host and founder of the globally acclaimed podcast, The Future is Beautiful. And she is interested where, as I am, this space between the inner and the outer world, where these worlds dance. Her podcast weaves together spirituality, creativity, politics, sustainability. She is here to inspire. I can speak for myself. You're here to inspire me personally to locate my intuition whenever we're in contact. And I'm really honored to have you here. I'm thrilled to talk about your new projects and just to learn a little bit more about your journey. As a facilitator, you bring people into connection with themselves, with each other and with the earth. You are hosting all sorts of workshops and rituals and private sessions and one-on-ones and mentoring and an online membership community. You are busy girl. And you also have your own jewelry label, which I love, with the tagline, Elegance Rebellion. I love this. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elena. What an absolute honor to be here with you today.
Thank you. I can't wait to tell the story of how we came to pass here. But first, your personal definition of intuition. Please teach my listener and me.
For me, intuition is about being in connection with the innate wisdom that we each hold. And it's a deep listening, a listening that comes from multiple channels, if you like. And so we can develop a relationship with listening to intuition from different parts of our body, or from our ancestors, or from the future. You know, there are lots of, or from nature. There are so many different wisdom channels available to us, if you like. And so for me, what intuition is that clear channel of truth that lives inside each one of us.
That's well said. I'm stuck on when you first said you can listen for your intuition from different parts of you. And I feel like that's an important moment in our conversation on which to focus. I can listen from my gut. I can listen from my brain. I can listen from my heart. I can listen from what's happening on my skin. Is the hair standing up on my skin? Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because I think you've had obviously extensive experience.
Yeah, well, I guess that in the culture that we live in, there is a desire to simplify everything. So it's like, well, what is your intuition? How do you know when it's your intuition talking to you? And it always wants to be kind of made into like this simple thing. And what I have discovered in myself is that my intuition has many voices and many ways of communicating to me. And sometimes it might be through a sensation in my heart, or something in my inner world that comes through a meditation, or through a sensation in my left knee. And other times my intuition might also communicate to me through you, or through something that I see when I walk into a room. And what I'm getting at is that we need to be really open and able to listen in multiple ways and in multiple kind of places, both internally and also in what we're experiencing in our life.
Let's go to that moment when I was teaching over at Tri Yoga in Camden in London, and you were in my class, and you had a sense that something was going on with me, and you actually approached me after some hesitation and
I
shared
was
with me.
terrified.
I said some hesitation, slight euphemism. I'm always so happy. I mean, most people know this about me if they've hung with me for any length of time, but I'm so happy to learn. Like I so don't want to be the one who knows everything and is finished, you know? So when you came over, I was like, yeah, cool. Let's go. Can you tell my listener a little bit about what happened there and how it was playing out for you? And then I'll share how it played out for me.
Yeah. And this story is fun because it came to me whilst I was writing this extra chapter for my book on intuition for the audiobook version, and just realizing how it was quite a strong defining moment. So for me, what was happening at that time was that I was being called in to deeper relationship with my intuition, and also with the sharing of it and the not being afraid or ashamed of it aspects. And I was in a place in that relationship where, having tried to silence a lot of this information for a number of years, I was studying with various mystics and teachers, and things had been opened up and a lot of information was coming through. And I was practicing in a way. And what happened in that class is really unusual because it's never happened since. And it hadn't happened before. But we were there for that teacher training weekend. And every time I looked at you, I saw this one particular piece of information. And I asked, and the question is, who do you ask? It's very hard to explain exactly. But I asked if I could clear it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer that I got was, you need to go talk to her about it. A- and I was
You
like,
can't do this in a vacuum, sister.
yeah. And I was like, no, I don't want to. That's not happening.
So cool.
Um, but then that evening, I was with some yoga teacher friends. It was someone's birthday, and I wouldn't normally share this because I was really in a place of finding it all actually a bit much, like all this information. And it was like suddenly I could see all these layers of reality that I hadn't been able to see before. And there was part of me that was really curious by it, and another part of me that just wanted to turn it all off. And I ended up saying to my friends, like, oh, something happened today. And I saw something. I didn't say what it was, but I said, I saw this thing, and this is what happened, but I'm just going to let that go. And they said, no, you can't. And I said, okay, well, then I'll go on Sunday. And they said, no, you can't go on Sunday when a teacher's just finished like a weekend workshop and it's the end. You have to do this tomorrow. And so the next day I was in the class and I was really nervous about it, kind of shaking a little bit when I came up to you. And I told you what it was. And you were so gracious and you sat up tall, and we spent the 30 seconds to clear it. I cried for like an hour after that because I was like just really, the whole thing was scary. And yeah, I think that's the only word I can use. It was an initiation, because it was out of the context of where I felt safe talking about those kinds of things, which was with one particular group of people that I was studying with. And I felt like it was a push to kind of come out of that space. And then what happened was, the next day, you said thank you to me at one point after you had done a demonstration in the class, and I think somebody else had asked a question, and so many people's questions really relate to worth. And it was a question that someone had about teaching, and you said you need to talk to Amisha about that. And I just laughed. There was kind of like this sort of,
I remember that part.
yeah, like, what do I have to offer to this person? And it's funny because, of course, I was a yoga teacher by that point, so it wasn't like I was living in a dynamic of I have nothing to offer, but it was almost like this aspect of it was an edge. And then the next day, or maybe it was later that day, I don't know, but there was a girl that on the very first day of the training had walked in, and I had looked at her and I had that feeling of like, oh, I know you from somewhere. And on the last day, I went up to her at lunchtime because you'd said something about how there was somebody you wanted me to work with that weekend.
I remember. That was such a weird feeling too. That was very intuitive also. I was like, oh, they need to hook up.
And so then I went over to this woman during lunchtime and I said to her, do we know each other? Like, where do you live? Like, what circles are you in? And she said no. And then you looked up from another table and said, Amisha, that's her. and
Crazy.
And so we went into the room, and James came with us. And this woman had, for about 4 years, been in a very dark place. She'd been kind of with this very dark, depressed energy. And it was something that had started after she'd been part of a fire ceremony somewhere in Africa. And I cleared it. And, this was like, I was there without anyone telling, me what to do, or without that kind of support. It was like, okay. And James was watching, and I cleared it. And then she was just grinning at me. And in the meantime, the rest of the group, you all came back into the room, and you were having this sort of beautiful moment gathered in the middle where poetry was being shared. And so it was very obvious that that me, James, and this woman were in the corner. And so for me, that was really challenging because it was also like this thing that I didn't want to be seen by anyone was now seen. Like everyone in the group could see that something was happening over there. And then the woman was smiling at me all afternoon. And her smile was making me feel really uncomfortable because it was telling me that you haven't been given your gifts to keep them a secret. Like, you have gifts so that you can help people, and you can help people find and live in their gifts. And we did a yoga asana after that, and I cried the entire way through. And I remember you came over several times and you said, you can stop. And I was like, no. And I had like puddles on my mat.
Bless. I remember. Such a special moment when, it wasn't easy for me to accept the teaching that you gave me. It's not the easiest thing. But I know it's what I needed. I know it's medicine. And so I tried to be, as open as I could be. And luckily that was your experience, because I was working my hardest. But I really appreciated the fact that you afterwards, upon reading your recounting of that you identified that as a pivot point really in your work and in your understanding of what was possible. And there's something that I want to say to my listener, which is my biggest wish is that we all would stop for a moment and see these important pivot points in our work and in our lives where we're being told something and we have to listen to it. And I would dare you further to, not you, Amisha, but you, the listener, to consider a time when you didn't listen to that intuition and what happened. Amisha, in your book, you've identified 9 main principles of intuition, and you go on to offer a slew of corresponding practices. I'm going to name the principles for my listener, and then I have a question for you. Create space is number 1. Be open. Embody. 4 is be still. 5, free yourself. 6, listen. 7, connect. 8, flow. 9 is trust. What was your process for identifying these 9 principles?
Well, first, I want to just say one thing to you, Elena, about what happened that day, and then I will happily share more about this process.
Yes.
I was very moved by your grace and generosity, and I went away from that class and I wrote to various friends and people in my community, and I said, I'm offering these sessions now, and would anyone like to come and try one out? And so that was the beginning, really, of an entire practice,
Wow.
which has then, now it is my presence mentoring program, the one-to-one leadership mentoring journey that I do. And we've just finished a cohort of that. I mean, it's one-to-one, but it sits alongside a group program called the Beautiful Leadership Immersion. And I've just been doing the last sessions with people of this 3-month journey where we meet every 2 weeks. And it's such gorgeous work. And I'm so pleased that I was pushed to do it, because I see it opening other people's intuition, opening up their gifts, clearing cultural, ancestral, generational trauma, and being a liberating force in this world. And that's why we're here, right? And so that was a very special moment for me in that. And I really want to honor you, because we need good teachers and mentors to show up for us just in those moments and just, do the nudge. And
Right.
yeah.
I feel very strongly that I would like to share. I don't normally do this in the middle of the podcast, but I'd really like to share your website right now with my listener in case this is resonating. How would somebody get in touch with you to work with you like this?
It's simply Amisha, amisha.co.uk.
Okay, got it. Great. I would love to hear about these 9 principles and the process of identifying them and the practices therein.
Well, so this book was offered to me, and again, it wasn't something that I sat down and thought, I want to write a book about intuition. The publisher came to me and said, we want you to write a book about intuition. And I felt a full body yes. And then the question, well, what is intuition and how do you explain that? And we had this idea that if we could create principles and practices, then it would be something that was open and easy to digest, because I believe that intuition is the most important skill that we can cultivate in this time for a number of reasons, from AI coming to living in a time where there's so much polarity and different kind of narratives of truth. And the process for me has been, I just sat down with it one day and I just asked, what are these principles? And these 9 kind of came through that process. And the whole book ended up being written from that intuitive place. I wrote the book during the global quarantine in March. I was living on my own in a tree house, and it was kind of like written sort of with so much happening like on the outside world, and my father was unwell and all of this stuff was happening. And so I just had to really dig deep and ask, what is the information that's going to be most useful for people as we're coming out of this pandemic, and that this book's going to come out at a time that's different to this one, and what will be useful. And so I've tried to really make it in a way broader than just intuition, because my understanding from my own path is that there's there are things you have to do in order to be able to really cultivate that listening. And a lot of it is to do with the clearing and the creating space and being open and the letting go of who you think you are or who you think you should be. And then from there, being able to be in a space of stillness and openness and trust and deep listening.
And then when you're saying clearing, I just want to get really super understanding of what that means when you say you cleared it. Teach us about that a little bit.
We are a collection of so many different aspects of information. And this information has come to us from so many different sources. And some of it is cultural, and some of it is ancestral. And in the first 7 years of our life, so between the time that we're in the third trimester in the womb and the age of 7, we're in this really open state. We're in these like theta brainwaves where we're absorbing everything in our environment. And it's because that's the time when we learn the most. And then what is fascinating is that, you know, that there's often this sense that as an adult, you're in control somehow of who you are. And, you know, it's about kind of what you learn. But what's really interesting is that conscious mind, the mind, you know, of like, well, I've read this book, or I'm interested in this, or this is the kind of person that I want to be. That information is actually not what is how you actually behave as an adult. And I found this fascinating to understand that 95% of your thoughts come from your subconscious. And it's your subconscious that's formed in those first 7 years of your life. And for people that maybe haven't done, you know, much of the work, the average is around 75% of these thoughts are limiting and self-sabotaging beliefs. So only 5% of these thoughts come from the conscious mind that you've cultivated. And out of the 60,000 thoughts a day that most people have, on average, 95% are the same as the ones that were had yesterday. And so I find that wild. And for me, it really just, you know, I mean, it did blow my mind when I learnt that. And it made so much sense to me as to why people are the way they are. And, you know, sometimes I think you can kind of imagine somebody, like, from seeing how they behave, like what they were like as a kid, quite easily. And there are certain politicians where it's really obvious, right?
Certain politicians.
Certain politicians, no names needed, where you can actually see this adult version of that kid playing out. And so I found this really interesting. And I found it really interesting that through certain practices, through certain types of work, you can actually clear what's in your subconscious. And then the way that you think is different, the way that you respond is different, the way that you act is different. And you can create more alignment with that which you consciously value. And that this is possible for anyone, no matter what kind of life they've had, how much trauma they have had to endure, and, you know, whatever the ancestral conditioning is as well. And, you know, it's a different path for different people, and it's a lifelong path, but it's possible. And the more that we clear away these limiting beliefs And also these cultural ideas of like what's normal and what's acceptable. So for me, one of the reasons that I cried so much, that weekend that we were together was because I don't know, and you don't have to believe in past lives or any of this, but there's something in me, and whether it's from a past life or whether it's from my ancestors or whether it's from my childhood or whether it's from like, wanting to have an easy life, having had immigrant parents and wanting to fit in. But there's something in me that just didn't want to go into like the worlds that are regarded as like woo woo or strange. Maybe there's something to do with that energy of, the burning of the witches, of colonization, of the way that people who have just lived with the innate intelligence that we all have been persecuted. And when I was crying that day, as I was moving my body through the asana, that was some of what I was releasing. That like I was releasing that fear because I knew that I had to do it. And that was what I was being asked to do with my life. And there was a huge part of me that was like, no, 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 no. I want to just work in politics and design jewelry and, maybe teach some yoga, but I don't want to look into people's subconscious and have to talk about it. And it was interesting because even with this one-to-one work, I was doing it and I didn't put it on my website for years. And I never mentioned it in my newsletter for years. I had such a journey with it. And all of this is the conditioning, and that's what can be cleared.
That makes sense. It's interesting to feel, having felt you working on that which you identified in me and clearing it. And I really did feel different afterwards. I really did. I have more questions about the book, and I'm just going to specific pages now. On page 91, you write about the importance of having adventures.
Mm-hmm.
I love this, so that you can stay connected to your intuition. I know what I feel like, going on an adventure, even here where I've moved to in New Mexico, just going for a day-long hike is an adventure where we get to connect to our intuition, even for a 45-minute hike. Talk to us about what it means, what connects adventures and our intuitive faculties.
Very simply, we use our intuition every time we make a decision that's out of our normal routine. And so, although we might equate intuition to being like making those very, very big decisions about life or seeing into the future or, something that has more of a like mystical quality to it or a very like life or death kind of quality to it, we actually use our intuition all the time. And anytime we use it, we're cultivating it. And adventure is one of those ways that we come outside of our routine. And the example of you being on your hike, you choose which path to take, where to look, all these different aspects that then have an impact on the hike that you have. And so it's opening ourselves up to freshness and to new pathways of information.
That makes sense. I do miss the real traveling, like the full-fledged getting on the plane. I don't miss it so much, but I do see how those sorts of adventures also really do add it to one's, the necessity for intuition, because you could take any sort of turn anytime. And to be able to intuit the next right move, the next person with whom to speak, etc. That's something that does come, I feel, with a lot of movement around travel and so forth. Page 128, you talk about how we can learn to correctly identify the voice of intuition, or soul, as you say, as opposed to the voice of ego. What would you say to someone who is struggling to recognize the voice of their intuition?
I would say that one of the ways to know that it's your ego is that often it's a bit of a dead end. Like your ego is really good at revealing like the problems, but not giving you another way. Your intuition is more like a friend and will tend to offer a different way of looking at it or some guidance. But this part is tricky and it requires cultivation. And it is a lifelong journey to get to know oneself, and that's the path of yoga that we keep learning more, and we keep opening more and more. But I've put some exercises in the book where you can actually start to differentiate different voices that you hear regularly and even give them characters. And then you get a sense of like what one of those particular voices is urging you to do, like what that voice's agenda is. And then you have to really, through practice, understand like what is the voice of your intuition, and there might be different voices of your intuition, and then trust in it. But the important thing to remember is that you can be playful with all of this, and you're going to get more chances. And so you have to just practice.
And then when you say that you have other practices, talk to us about, I don't know if you can, a sample sort of practice so my listener can see what that would possibly even remotely feel like.
Yeah. So it depends a little bit on the kind of person that you are and how information flows through you. And that's why in the book there are 53 practices, and they don't all have to be done, and they don't have to be done sequentially. And really it's about finding what works for you. And so one practice that a lot of people find helpful, if you have a specific question, that you can sit quietly in contemplation with that question and then take out your notebook and start to write. Maybe you even write with your non-dominant hand if that kind of helps you to control it less. And genuinely allow yourself to be surprised by what you write on the page. Another one of my favorite ones, because I'm more of a talking audio person, I find that my intuition comes out through me speaking, but it has to be to somebody that's a really good listener and that creates like, a really great field of listening where my truth feels very free. So I know who those friends are. And, sometimes I might call them and say, can I just talk this through with you? And I'm not asking them to jump in or to fix anything or to tell me what to do. I'm simply asking them to like give me the space to listen to myself and with them. And so, talking to a friend, it's super simple, but can be really effective. And then there are like some other really lovely practices. Maybe you have an ancestor that means a lot to you. And in my case, my father, and Elena, perhaps for you, your mother, that you can ask them and listen, or go for walks in nature with a question and just hold it very loosely, and then see if by the time you get back from that walk, there is just a clear sensation around what to do, how to act next.
It's funny you mentioned your father and my mother. I was going to ask you about that next. How have you been? How are you feeling? And how is his influence on your intuitive practices and faculties impacting you today?
Yeah, I was feeling into that we were having this conversation today after my meditation this morning, and tears came into my eyes as I as I kind of felt this connection, because I really appreciate how you've shared your grief and your love, because I think that not a lot of people do. And I have also been sharing a lot about my father since he passed, because I feel like it's really important that we are able to talk about death and honor ancestors. It was really intense what happened. And I got back to my mum and dad's house from the treehouse 3 weeks before he died, and I wasn't aware that he was dying this year. And he and I felt like he needed my attention, and I was trying to finish the book so that I could give him fully my attention. And of course, it didn't happen like that. The book went to print days after he died, and I was editing it. I was finishing writing the practices and editing it whilst he was dying, like next to him. And so that was a really intense liminal space that we were in. And really, it was 2 weeks before he died, and the doctor had come over. And I showed the doctor out, and I said, "Do you think my dad's going to die this year?" And he said, "Oh, I think it could be months, if not weeks, if not days or something." And I was like, "Okay, really?" And a week later, I had a dream, and the dream showed me very clearly that he was dying, and in a way what to do about it. And after I had that dream, we didn't have any conversations around, with me as Amisha and him as my dad, and I'm sorry about this, and I love you, and I did, I wish I could have done this better, and what do you want from me? And we didn't have any of those conversations. I really just felt to give him space, and to honor the soul that was bigger than the personality of this lifetime of as my father. And the only
Wait.
yeah.
Halt, 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 halt. That is a very important highlight. Okay. My listener, I'm welling up in here. My throat is getting blocked. I'm going to try not to cry. Can you, this is to the listener, can you heed what Amisha just has said and see your parent as bigger, not bigger better, but bigger than their role as your parent, as a soul, as an individual soul? And whether you have a good relationship, terrible relationship, no contact, too much contact, whatever it is, can you just see that soul's path as separate from yours in some way, and allow that soul to be what it is, who it is, how it is, without having so much reaction to it? That, I think, is one of the biggest gifts of this conversation for me right now.
Yeah, and I only managed it in the last week of his life, but
You still did it.
that's enough, right? And it was
For sure.
it was it was a week of watching him die. It was like being in ceremony, and we were kind of taking shifts, like in the room with him. One of us was there most of the time. And you kind of have to intuit, like, do I sing? Do I be quiet? Does he need something? Is he hot? Like, shall I touch him? Shall I give him space? And so just kind of really, really being there, watching him clear his karmas. And the only real conversation we had that week was one where I could feel that he was, frustrated that he hadn't died yet. Dying's not an easy process. And I said to him, and I never really shared like my, what I did to you that day by coming up to you and saying that. Like, I don't do that now, and I never do that with my family, especially. And I said to him, Dad, I keep asking why you haven't died yet, and I keep getting the same answer. Can I tell you what it is? And he said, yeah, please. And I told him what it was, and we talked it through. And it wasn't like me talking to my father. It was like two souls having a conversation that was in aid of his liberation. And then that he pretty much went into silence after that. And he and then he died a few days later. And it was like watching an ego dissolve, and then the soul just took up the whole space. And I had the most beautiful meditation after he left his body, and I felt a very clear sense of him sharing the transmissions of everything he wanted to teach me that our egos wouldn't let possible. And so that was very powerful and very beautiful. And I also had the experience, how people say that when you die and your life flashes before your eyes. I got to see, I wouldn't be so bold to think it was everything, but I got to see quite a proportion of his story from birth to death that
Wow.
was way bigger than
Wow.
the years that I knew about him, and that's given me this really different relationship with him than the one that I had when he was alive. And he didn't have an easy life, and some of our karmic kind of bondage was around that part of it. And yet he was the inspiration for living from intuition. He was a psychiatrist and a Jungian analyst. I grew up with the complete works of Jung in the house. My first job was making tea for his patients, and I spent a lot of time talking to him about intuition. And somehow it's like, even with that as a childhood, I still went through destructive teen years where I was disconnected from it. And I still went through that process of having to come back into relationship with it. And of course, as he's dying, I realized, like, wow, what a gift. My dad made all his big decisions, from coming to England to proposing to my mum, who was of a different religion. This is in the early 70s. Lots of things that he did that had not been done before, and that were, really very like visionary. And it was his intuition that always guided him. And he did always tell me that. And there are many things that he always told me that I just couldn't hear. And as soon as he died, of course, it all just came flooding in, including, things like pensions. I'm like, oh, he kept trying to talk to me about pensions, but I couldn't hear him ever. And then I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to pay attention to that. It's fascinating what happens, and how egos get in the way.
Yes, of course. My listener in the US, pensions means 401k. I'm just so thankful for this entire aspect of this talk, because there are several of my listeners who are now going to be faced with parents passing. And instead of making it into a dramatic, sad, awful scenario, to have the wherewithal and the foresight to hear what you've just said. And I am seeing and hearing all of my own echoes. I only had 24 hours to experience that passing of my mom. But to watch the ego dissolve and to feel the soul take up the room, and to intuit, like, when is it time to sing mantras, and when is it time to talk, and when is it time to just be quiet and sit still, when is it time to look away, that makes the death of a loved one, as awful as it may seem at first, into something more holy than childbirth.
Yeah.
It's such a sacred moment in time. And I never, I've known it because I was around other people dying, but it wasn't my mother or my father. It was, other folks. My mom passing, I got to see the sanctity and feel it. So that's a very helpful bit. I thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I have been obsessed with death for a long time. A friend of mine got killed in front of me in a hit and run when we were 24 in New York City.
Wow.
In the East Village.
Wow. What?
Yeah.
I did not know this. What are you saying to me right now?
Yeah,
Where were you?
we were on Bowery, and we
And
had been out, and
wait, but where? Bowery and what?
I can't remember the cross street. I know it.
Prince Street? Was it
No,
Prince Street?
um, I'm not going to remember the cross street right in this moment.
Down lower?
Yeah, East Village.
Okay.
And Bowery's a 6-lane road, and I think you know that I got driven over by a 4-wheel drive pickup truck when I was 21.
I did not know this.
Okay. Well, we'll have to skip through some of these stories 'cause,
Oh my goodness.
but that happened when I was 21. And actually, when I was 19, me and Julia, my friend that died, had been in a bus crash in Bolivia where we'd gone 50 meters down the side of a mountain and we'd all survived. So Jules and I had had that experience, and then I had been driven over by the truck. And I mean over, I don't mean hit. I mean like the guy was so drunk that he carried on driving. So I had to dig deep into my spirituality and also healing in order to heal from that. And then when I was in New
Wow.
York, I was visiting her, and I was crossing all the roads at the crossings because of having been driven over by a truck. And she was being more New York about it and kind of, jaywalking. And
Oh dear.
and then
Oh God.
what happened was that night we'd gone out and we came back, and the cab parked opposite her house, so 6 lanes away from her house. And we got out of the car, and I just started walking towards the crossing, which wasn't very far. And
And
she
she
just,
started walking across the street.
yeah. And
Oh my
a
God.
kid had just joyrided his dad's black car and was driving at 50 miles an hour and
Oh my
hit
God.
her straight on.
Oh my God.
And that meant that at 24, not only did I have to learn a lot about, guilt and karma, but I really needed to understand death, and I needed to know, like, where had she gone? Why did this happen? Why was I there? And so I spent a lot of time learning about death and understanding it. And it also meant that I was, I wanted to talk about it all the time. And obviously, a lot of other people in their 20s, early 20s, don't want to talk about death. And so that was a whole process. But it's also meant that people come to me about death a lot, and that it's something that I'm really interested in, that I've studied a lot, that I really try and understand. So I was really, really, really grateful to have been able to be there for that moment with my father. And and yeah, and to trust in that process and to let form change, and of course I miss my father, but I know that it was his time, and we're still in relationship. And actually, he is more supportive now than he was when he was alive, because there's more of him.
It's interesting how that works. I've spoken with several of my peers who say the same. And it's not that I'm not happy my mother's gone. I'm not happy she's gone. I wish I could call her right now and just celebrate some things. But I do get the sense of your father, my mother, now that they're free from this body, they're non local, they can be extremely supportive because they can trust and see that we're fine here
Yeah.
without them. Which brings me to my last point, which is I often think about this with regards to my own kid. And almost every day I practice when I do yoga nidra, which happens almost every day. I practice letting go of my body, trusting that he will be fine if I were to just pass on today. He would be perfectly fine. It would be super, super sad, but he would be fine. And I think about how I could help him in that other form. Ooh, I get so excited about that. You know, like, okay, if and when I'm ready, I'm weirdly ready. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I just want to leave about 2 minutes open for you. If you have anything that you feel called to add to this before we close.
I feel that where I am in my life right now is in a place of trust, and intuition is one of those tools. And our intuition is really a part of our intelligence, and it's become something else in this culture. And the analogy that I've been it's been coming to mind recently is that if we were suddenly told that we were no longer allowed to use our right foot and we just hopped everywhere on our left foot because that was normal when we had a perfectly good right foot, and that just became the cultural norm, how strange that would be and what a waste. And that's the equivalent of what we've done with our intuition. It is an absolutely normal part of every human being. We all have access to this intelligence, and the world needs it. You know, all the work that I do with the future is beautiful, and this inquiry into, you know, what it is to be human right now and how to show up. I believe that the wisdom that we're looking for, that is going to guide, you know, us towards a beautiful future, is here, and it's in all of us. And it is up to us to come into a direct relationship with our intuition so that we can show up for the collective healing. And I wonder if I can just read you a tiny bit from the book. This one part, which is called Evolving Through Trust. Often in life, we meet the same kinds of challenges in different disguises. There is a powerful analogy of life being like a spiral staircase. You are climbing up this staircase and you see the same wallpaper on the walls, but simply from a different viewpoint. It's not the same, yet it is familiar. Your challenges can feel like this. I thought I'd already resolved this one. Ever had that kind of feeling? There is a fine line between getting stuck and repeating patterns unnecessarily, and evolving through the pattern so you understand it differently each time. Trust allows you to hold where you have come from and where you are going, all in the present moment. It allows you to live with courage, resilience, and sovereignty. Trust means that you connect to a happiness or sense of peace in yourself that is not dependent on circumstances. You are able to trust in who you are, why you are here, and what you are learning. You find the simple pleasure of being you, whether it's a quote unquote good day, quote unquote bad day, or a really mediocre one. Your life isn't waiting for certain things to happen in order for you to be happy. You have cultivated a sense of joy, purpose, and trust in your life from your intuition, and that makes every day count. From here, life's mystery is an exciting place. You don't know what's going to happen, but you trust in your role. Your intuition will guide you to do whatever supports your truth. This takes the fear out of life and worry out of what will happen, and instead opens you up to living life beautifully. As you do this with true humility and grace, you will be a sacred activist, stitching your threads into the weave of our beautiful future.
Wow. Those are words you feel in your cells. Thank you for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you for your intuition. Thank you for coming up to me that day. Thank you for all of this, truly. I'm so I'm really touched. Let's say that. Very touched. Repeat it for us once again, your websites, places where we can find your great work, please.
Thank you, Elena. And really thank you for everything that you do in this world and the way in which you do it. It's very beautiful work. My website is www.amisha.co.uk, and you can find out there information about the book, and there's some really beautiful gifts that we've put together for people that go in and want those, and with the book. And you can find out how to join the beautiful leadership immersion and presence mentoring and one-to-one sessions and retreats, all that kind of stuff. And then my podcast, which is, to me, it's more than a podcast. It's really a call to the leadership that we need at this time, which is deeply human. And it's The Future is Beautiful, and the website is www.thefutureisbeautiful.co. And we have over 100 episodes, and they are deep. Each episode's, in a way, it's a bit like a ceremony of sorts, and there's so much wisdom that's been shared on there. And we go into all the difficult conversations, climate breakdown, racism, all of it, but from that point of like heart space.
Rather than headspace.
Yeah.
Mm. Thank you for that, Amisha. I look forward to listening to your podcast too on my next walk alone. And thank you for being here today. I'm sending you so much love and more soon.
My absolute pleasure.
Thank you.